Hello and welcome to the Forbes India cover story podcast series in association with theindicars.com. My name is Abhishek and this issue's cover is on how a handful of startups in India have figured out a way to do business and even flourish during these uncertain times. Joining me on the call to talk about his cover is Forbes India's Rajiv Singh. Hi Rajiv, it's been a while.
Oh, yeah, Abhishek, it has been a while. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. And I think Forbes India has been dishing out covers on and around COVID. This time it's slightly different. It's not on the science of the virus as much as it is of how it has dented certain business models across the industries in India. And you've covered a bunch of them. And the rubric to your story reads how COVID-19 has forced a clutch of startups to pivot. Now, pivot is a word that is usually, over abused in business journalism, but you go to great depths to tell us why you use it. What does it mean? Could you paint a quick picture about what it is that you set out to achieve? And why do you think these companies have pivoted?
So, have you played basketball, Abhishek? Let me explain you pivoting in terms of basketball. When was the last time you played basketball?
I've watched a bit and I play with my 1.5-year-old kid, so that doesn't call for much because I'm the one doing most of the dribbling. But that's about the extent of my playing.
So, the basic rule and the simple rule of pivoting is when you are keeping one foot intact, one foot is grounded, and you're moving around with your second foot. That's the fundamental about pivoting, whether in sports or whether in business. You keep the core intact. There have been cases where people have changed the core, but they are exceptions. So usually the core is intact. So in all the examples that you see in the story, the core is intact. So if you look at Delhivery, the largest e-commerce logistics player or B2B logistics player, it shifted from B2B to B2C, if you see, or hyper-local in fact. But the core is still intact, still delivering. Earlier it was not hyper-local. But ironically for the company, when it started a long time back, for first 3 months, it was into hyper-local. And then it quickly shifted to or pivoted to other format.
When you say hyperlocal, I think it went beyond just delivering e-commerce orders, but went door to door selling medicines and food grains and even sanitizers, masks, and groceries and the like, right? And the numbers are staggering. You write that there were some 2.5 million orders of medicine alone and some 10,000 tons of grain that was being dispatched.
Yeah, see, we need to understand that what happened during lockdown. The movement of essential goods was allowed. The movement of non-essential came to a halt. So you have to, devise something or think of something, some ways in which you can continue with the business. And grocery and medicine and all these are very essential.
There was barely any time for these companies to react. I read and I quote Sahil Barua of Delhivery. He says that the potential risk became actual risk within 7 days. How did some companies, let's take Delhivery, how did they decide that they could change overnight?
Delivery can do it overnight because the core, again, I will keep on talking about it. Core was always intact. The infrastructure was in place. The network was in place. They didn't have to do anything much except to activate and, get used to the new form of delivery. And they had an inkling of, the size or the crisis that could hit India because they had operations in China as well. So early March, I think if I'm not wrong, 3rd or 4th of March, they shut down for a few days. And later on, when Pan India shutdown happened somewhere around 24th of March, and they quickly shifted to hyperlocal.
What 17,000 odd pin codes is what they cater to across the country. But do you foresee that some of the challenges include, I'm sure there'll be companies which will get around it with shortage of labor, or now that the lockdown has opened up, there might just be a little more business. So now they'll have the other problem where how do we deal with sudden opening up? Because now what happens, they have the option of continuing hyper local because they have that network, and you go back to your original business as well as the economy hopefully slowly opens up.
So in case of Delhivery, one thing is very interesting. They didn't have any COVID related layoff or salary cut. They had a regular increment during March, and 7.8, again if I'm not wrong, 7.8% salary hike. So while other companies on other hand were facing labor shortage or problem due to migration of all these guys to villages, they didn't face any such problem.
And how about some of the other companies that you covered? What was your experience? If you could illustrate that with some examples.
Yeah, let's talk about Pharma Rack. Again, it's a B2B pharma tech company. In fact, the biggest B2B pharma tech company in India. The idea was it's a platform that connects retailers and distributors. And when I talk about retailers, it's the chemist. During lockdown, and they experience an insane bounce rate. Bounce rate is when chemists are placing orders, but orders are not getting fulfilled because of whatever reasons. And in this case, the only reason was because there was no movement. So while there was demand, there was no supply. The only way to fix the problem was when you start supplying yourself. So they started taking all these medicines from the companies and started supplying them to the chemist. So not only intra-city but also intercity. So they use trains, they use autos, they use two-wheelers to supply medicines. So conventionally, you can't say they are still B2C, they are not. But they were never into delivery of medicine. Now they have started delivering to chemists and doctors.
And you also have Clover is what you write about, and we spoke very briefly before we recorded this call, where it's a greenhouse agri tech startup. And the idea is it used to supply fresh produce to hotels, and it had incidentally raised $5.5 million to expand to various cities. What happens to a business like this where the VCs have funded you with money? There have been lots of PowerPoint presentations and whiteboard brainstorming exercises to take the company at the next stage, and then you have to slam the brakes on your expansion. So how did they deal with it?
Imagine how devastating it would have been for them. They were almost set to expand their operation, move into multiple cities, and then suddenly this lockdown and COVID happened. So for a predominant B2B company that was supplying fruit and vegetables to hotels and restaurants, demand vanished overnight. And during such situation, you need to figure out how to survive, how to look for new set of consumers, how to generate demand. So directly from B2B, they moved to B2C, which is supplying to direct consumers in gated communities, in localities, in housing societies. And interestingly, the demand now is more than what it was before COVID situation.
And overall, although we are talking about some companies which have done well in these times, the situation is quite bad. You quote a report from NASCOM which says that some 30 to 40% of tech startups have either temporarily shelved their operations or pretty much shutting shop.
Abhishek, usually companies or startups don't pivot at such an abnormal rate. But we also need to understand that the situation actually is abnormal. Usually pivoting happens when there is a market demand misfit, when the product that you have made doesn't have a demand in the market. And this could be for two reasons. There are no takers because your product doesn't solve a particular problem, or your product might be or service might be well ahead of the time. But in this case, pivoting has happened in all the cases and all the examples across the globe, in India as well, because because of the external factor, which is COVID. They were forced to pivot. And in such situations, you look at the NASCOM report, if 40% of the companies, IT or tech companies, are planning to pivot because they have been forced. And if they don't, they would die. So there is one segment of companies or startups who are pivoting only to survive, or only to pay salary to the employees, only to keep the engine running. That's also another form of pivoting which this COVID has generated.
How long do you see this going?
Abhishek, honestly, I don't want to make a wild guess, but a couple of quarters, definitely, if not years. Definitely a couple of quarters. Because we have to adjust to the new normal. Whether it's working from home or whether it's pivoting or whether it's learning to survive, we have to. There is no option left.
Right. You also mentioned before we started the call, Rajiv, how Forbes India itself has undergone a few transitions internally where some quick decisions were taken, where the core remains journalism, obviously, but your medium of reaching out to us readers has switched. Would that be right? Where I suspect there is more of digital than there was in the past.
So if you can call that a pivoting, then definitely, temporarily we have pivoted to digital. But the core is same. All of us are still churning out stories that we used to do. Definitely you're reaching out to a wider audience.
Talking about reaching out to a wider audience, you also write about a company called JetSetGo. I found that an interesting one. Correct me if I'm wrong. That service was meant to have high net worth individuals rent a private plane, but now the company started renting out individual seats, such that I wonder they might be reasonably affordable it might circumvent the need to stand in long lines at the airports and get to where you want to quickly. Is that how it works?
See, the idea private chartered business, it was always you take the entire plane. They never had a model of selling one particular seat. And the new business model developed out of care, not out of making insane money or profit. It was only because of Kanika thought of serving vulnerable population who are above 55 and below 10, trying to make them travel or reach their particular destination. That's how the jet set care idea started. But it also gave her a sense that if expanded after a couple of few months, it could mean a nice business opportunity, because there are so many people who have not experienced the experience of a chartered flight. And now, because of the concerns of encountering so many touch points when you're at the airport, or having very almost a safe way of traveling, this might turn out to be a nice opportunity.
Right. Rajiv, in the interest of time, I think it's time to wrap this one up. But thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Abhishek. Great talking to you.
As usual, thank you very much, Rajiv, for your time. And all you listeners, you can get this podcast on ForbesIndia.com as well as on iTunes. You also can find us on Spotify and on Stitcher.